Bazzite Deck 44 and Fedora 44 can both put you in front of the same games, on much of the same hardware using much of the same Linux foundation. So if the question is simply, which one has more frames per second, this video is going to give you a more useful answer. That is often the wrong question. The real difference is what each project is trying to optimize. Bazzite is designed to get a gaming-focused machine, handheld, or living room PC into a curated experience with fewer moving parts to choose yourself. Fedora gives you a broadly capable desktop where gaming is very good, but where you decide more of the shape of the system. And the Deck 44 update makes that distinction more important. It changes the handheld-oriented stack in ways that matter on compatible devices, but it does not turn every normal desktop into a Steam Deck. By the end, you will know which route fits your hardware, how much maintenance you are willing to own, and how to try either one without making your current setup worse. First, the shared foundation matters. Bazzite is built from Fedora Atomic technology, while Fedora 44 is the broader Fedora release family, conventional desktop editions, atomic desktops, and alternative spins. That means this is not a simple beginner versus expert fight, and it is not a case of one project being Linux while the other is something unrelated. Both can benefit from current Fedora work. Fedora 44 brings GNOME 50 to Workstation, Plasma 6.6 to the KDE desktop, and it documents end-sync support being enabled through package recommendations for Wine and Steam. That is relevant to Windows games, but it is not a promise that every game will suddenly perform the same way on every machine. Your GPU, driver, game build, compositor, storage, and the game itself still matter. Bazzite takes a narrower position. It starts from an atomic Fedora base and adds decisions intended for gaming systems. The value is not that a gamer cannot reproduce pieces of it on Fedora. The value is that someone else has already made and tested a set of choices around gaming mode, controllers, handheld behavior, updates, and supported workflows. So the question for the rest of this video is not, which distro wins? It is, do I want a curated gaming appliance that is still a Linux desktop or a general Linux desktop that I will shape into my own gaming machine? Deck 44 is the reason to revisit Bazzite now. Universal Blue describes it as the largest rework of the Bazzite Deck images so far, with a Steam OS-aligned stack replacing the old arrangement. The announcement names Input Plumber for controller handling, Steam OS Manager for session switching and related Steam controls, Power Station for power and TDP duties where Steam OS Manager cannot cover the device, and Open Gamepad UI for additional options. That sounds like a collection of names, but it translates into a practical idea. On a handheld, the hard part is not only launching a game, it is making controls, power limits, session changes, overlays, and the small device-specific details behave like one coherent experience. The important caveat is that this is not magic and it is not identical on every device. The project calls out areas where behavior can differ, including TDP controls, RGB, fan control, and some handheld-specific limitations. If you are buying or repurposing a handheld, that is exactly why Bazzite deserves a serious look. If you are using a desktop tower with a keyboard, mouse, and a standard Steam client, some of the Deck 44 work may matter less to your daily life. Fedora 44 is not standing still while Bazzite improves its gaming image. Fedora gives you several legitimate starting points. You can choose a conventional workstation-style desktop, you can choose KDE Plasma desktop, or you can use an atomic desktop if you like an image-based update and rollback model without adopting Bazzite's gaming-specific defaults. For a gaming PC that also needs to be a normal computer, that flexibility is a serious advantage. Perhaps you want a familiar desktop with a full selection of development tools. Perhaps you use specialized work software, unusual peripherals, containers, virtual machines, or package sources that are easier to reason about on a conventional Fedora setup. Perhaps you enjoy configuring the system and do not see that as maintenance debt. Fedora 44 also gives KDE users Plasma 6.6, including a new login manager and setup experience, while workstation users get GNOME 50. Those are not gaming features in isolation, but they matter because you do not live inside Steam all day. The distro you choose also decides how pleasant the rest of the machine is when you are updating, troubleshooting, working, streaming, or just browsing the web. Before you install either one, do a hardware reality check. Bazzite's own documentation puts attention on minimum requirements, Steam gaming mode requirements, compatible handhelds, Vulkan-capable GPUs, storage file systems, and sharing games with a Windows Dual Boot. That is a useful checklist even if you eventually choose Fedora. For a standard AMD desktop, a compatible Intel system, or a well-supported handheld, the decision can be primarily about workflow. For NVIDIA systems, older machines, dual GPU laptops, unusual Wi-Fi hardware, capture cards, and specialized peripherals, do not start with a video recommendation. Start with the exact hardware, the current project documentation, and a live test from a USB drive or spare storage device. The same applies to storage. If you keep a Windows installation, share a game library, or rely on an NTFS data drive, read the file system guidance before you treat a drive as interchangeable. A gaming distro can make the first hour easier. It cannot make incompatible assumptions about a shared drive disappear. That is why I would never publish a fake benchmark chart here. A recommendation is useful only if it survives your actual GPU, controller, storage, and game library. Bazzite earns its reputation when your goal is short time to game. Its purpose is to make a gaming-first setup feel more considered from the start. For a couch PC, a handheld, or a machine that should mainly behave like a console, that is often more valuable than a long menu of options. Fedora can absolutely be a strong gaming platform, but the experience asks a different question. What do you want to control? The answer can include your desktop environment, how you handle drivers and repositories, which tools you install, and how closely you want the machine to resemble a conventional Linux workstation. Neither path removes the need to test the games that matter to you. Anti-cheat support, mode managers, launchers, VR, HDR, recording, controller mapping, and niche peripherals can all change the answer. The honest comparison is not Bazzite plays games and Fedora does not. The honest comparison is that Bazzite reduces the number of initial choices for a gaming-centered machine, while Fedora makes more of those choices visible and available. If you enjoy that control, Fedora can be the better experience. If you would rather spend the evening playing rather than revisiting the stack, Bazzite may be the better experience. A lot of distro comparisons fail because they turn a workflow choice into a number. Gaming mode is a good example. It is not a benchmark result, and it is not a promise that every game runs faster. It is a way of arranging the machine around the controller, the display, the session, and the expectation that you may want to sit down and launch a game without treating the desktop as the main event. That is why Bazzite can feel very different even when the game itself is drawing through the same broad Linux graphics stack you could use elsewhere. The value is in the default path. It is in how many choices have already been made for a gaming-first machine and how close the result feels to the way a handheld or console-style PC is normally used. Fedora can also be used from the sofa. You can install Steam, configure a controller, choose a desktop, and build a perfectly good living room setup. But it is more honest to say that Fedora gives you the components and Bazzite gives you a more opinionated starting arrangement. Neither is universally better. The question is whether you want to build the room or walk into one that has already been laid out for the thing you came to do. Updates are where the philosophy becomes visible. Bazzite is image-based and built around an atomic approach. That can make it attractive when you value a known deployment, an update path designed around the image, and a rollback story that is easier to explain to someone who just wants the machine working again. Fedora is not one thing here. A conventional Fedora desktop and a Fedora Atomic desktop have different operational patterns. If you choose Fedora Atomic, you get a more direct comparison with Bazzite's deployment model. If you choose a conventional desktop, you gain a familiar package-managed environment and a different kind of flexibility. The practical advice is the same whichever route you choose. Do not make a major update 5 minutes before a game night. Keep a known good bootable option. Change one important variable at a time. If you use third-party packages or a complex setup, document the pieces you will need after a rollback or reinstall. Bazzite may be a better fit if your definition of a good update is install it, reboot, play, and recover quickly if it goes wrong. Fedora may be a better fit if your definition is understand and control the individual parts of the system. Neither answer is more Linux than the other. It is also worth separating two ideas that are often collapsed into one. Bazzite is image-based and built from Fedora Atomic technology. Fedora itself offers Atomic desktops too, so choosing Fedora Atomic is not the same as choosing a conventional package-managed Fedora desktop, and choosing Bazzite is not the only way to get a deployment-oriented update model. What Bazzite adds is a gaming-focused set of defaults, integrations, and supported paths around that Atomic foundation. What Fedora Atomic gives you is a way to start from Fedora's own Atomic desktop choices and decide more of the rest yourself. A conventional Fedora desktop is a third path, more traditional, more direct, and often more comfortable for people who like managing the pieces. This matters because people sometimes hear immutable or atomic and assume the operating systems are interchangeable. They are not. The update model is only one layer of the ownership experience. Gaming mode, handheld support, controller expectations, available images, documentation, and the project's intended audience can all change the practical answer. The most interesting viewers are often in the awkward middle. You have a Windows game library, you may have a shared drive, you play mostly Steam titles, but one or two games need a launcher, a mod manager, an anti-cheat implementation, or a peripheral that does not behave perfectly on Linux. And you may also need the machine for work. For that person, Bazzite is not automatically the answer just because it is gaming focused. The project documentation itself gives you things to think about around storage file systems, unsupported secondary drive formats, and Windows dual boot sharing. Those details should not frighten you away, they should change the way you test. Fedora can be a better laboratory for a mixed use machine because you are closer to a conventional desktop workflow. But that also means you own more of the setup. If your work machine is the same as your gaming machine, write down the applications that cannot fail, test them before committing, and keep the old environment available until you know the replacement is working. The wrong move is a dramatic overnight migration. The right move is to prove one game, one controller, one storage path, and one work task at a time. Choose Bazzite first if the machine is mainly a gaming device. That can mean a Steam Deck-like handheld, a living room PC, a dedicated desktop gaming box, or a secondary machine where you want fewer setup decisions between the install and the first game. It is particularly compelling if the things you value are controller behavior, gaming mode, a SteamOS adjacent experience, and a deployment model designed to be less hands-on. Deck 44 makes the handheld angle more interesting because the project is actively investing in the stack around controls and power management rather than treating those details as an afterthought. But choose Bazzite with your eyes open. You still need to check your exact hardware, drivers, secondary storage, modding needs, and the games that are non-negotiable. Bazzite is a strong answer to a specific problem. It is not a universal replacement for every Linux desktop. Choose Fedora 44 first if your gaming PC is also your general desktop and you want more direct control over the environment. That can be a developer workstation that also plays games, a machine with specialized tooling, a desktop where you want to choose your own path for drivers and packages, or a system where you enjoy understanding what is installed and why. Fedora also makes sense if you want the current desktop experience without adopting all of Bazzite's gaming defaults. KDE users can look at Plasma 6.6, workstation users can look at GNOME 50, Atomic Desktop users can choose an image-based model while keeping closer to Fedora's own editions. This is not a consolation prize. A well-built Fedora gaming setup can be excellent. The trade-off is simply that the distro is giving you more room to make choices and more room to own the consequences of those choices. There is one final reality check. Neither Bazzite nor Fedora can promise universal compatibility. A Windows game can depend on anti-cheat policy, a launcher update, a proprietary driver edge case, a mod manager, a controller firmware quirk, or a feature that is still developing under Linux. The same applies to HDR, VR, recording, and unusual hardware. That is not a reason to avoid Linux gaming. It is a reason to make your decision with evidence rather than community slogans. Check the exact game, check the exact device, read the documentation for your storage and dual boot plan. And if you are moving a machine you depend on, keep a known good route back until your own tests are complete. The best distro is not the one with the loudest recommendation. It is the one whose trade-offs match the machine in front of you and the amount of maintenance you actually want to own. Here is the test I would run before moving a real machine. First, make a list of 3 games, one easy Steam title, one title that stresses the area you care about most, and one awkward game with a launcher, controller, anti-cheat, or mod requirement. Second, test the exact hardware you will use. That means the actual GPU, display mode, controller, headset if you use one, and the drive where the games will live. Third, test a normal task that has nothing to do with gaming. Open the work application you rely on, use your usual peripherals, and confirm that your backups and documents behave as expected. Then update once, reboot, play one game again. If you cannot explain how to return to the known good state, you are not ready to make it your primary machine. That test does not take long, and it gives you a better answer than someone else's generic recommendation. It also tells you whether Bazzite's curated approach saves you time, or whether Fedora's flexibility is exactly what you wanted. Before you choose, write down 5 answers. Is this machine primarily for gaming, or is it also your work desktop? Do you need a handheld style controller and power management experience? Which 3 games, launchers, and peripherals must work on day 1? Are you sharing storage with Windows? And when an update goes wrong, do you want the most curated recovery path or the most direct control over the pieces? If your answers point toward a dedicated gaming box, start with Bazzite. If they point toward a mixed-use desktop you want to shape yourself, start with Fedora. Then test the answer on your own hardware before you erase anything. Bazzite Deck 44 is the better starting point when the machine's job is mostly to be a gaming machine, particularly if handheld behavior, controllers, gaming mode, and a console-like rhythm are what you care about. Fedora 44 is the better starting point when the machine is a broader desktop and you value flexibility, conventional workflows, or the ability to decide more of the system yourself. Fedora Atomic is worth a look if you want some of the image-based safety model without taking the full Bazzite path. The important part is that you do not choose based on a logo, a single chart, or a claim that one distro is always faster. Choose based on the machine you own and the problems you want the operating system to solve. If you have tried Bazzite, Fedora, or both on the same hardware, leave a comment with the device GPU, controller, and the one thing that made you stay or switch. That kind of detail will help the next viewer much more than a generic "works great" ever could. And if this kind of practical Linux deep dive is useful, subscribe to Ton Does Linux and more. You can also support the channel directly through the join button if you would like the extra perks. Thanks for watching.